Can you name a single character from the movie Avatar?
Is that the blue people?
That is the blue people, yes.
The best measure of the cultural impact of James Cameron's Avatar is this 2019 video from YouTuber Jack Douglas.
Can you name one character from Avatar, the James Cameron one?
No.
No one can.
The premise of the video is simple. Douglas goes out to Santa Monica Pier and asks strangers to name any character from James Cameron's Avatar. And, with a single exception, no one can.
Aang.
Aang?
Oh, wrong Avatar. The main character's name is Jake.
Can we get a full name?
Last name.
Oh,
But
we're gonna need a full name. Or any one of the blue people. There are a bunch of them. There are dozens of them.
Which is surprising when you think about it. I mean, nearly every person on Earth saw Avatar when it premiered in 2009. It took in over $2 billion at the box office in its initial run, and with re-releases has come close to reaching $3 billion. So why have so many writers asked why people don't remember Avatar? The common criticisms of the film as a reskinned version of Dances with Wolves or Fern Gully or Pocahontas, these are extremely cold takes at this point. Plenty of films with rehashed plotlines have still gained a foothold in popular culture. What was it about the film that failed to stick with audiences beyond the premiere? Danny DePlacido, writing for Forbes in 2020, put forward a possible argument: the lack of lore. Lore is fuel for the dedicated fan base, the people who cosplay, write fanfiction, and spend endless hours discussing and dreaming about a fictional world. The reason their struggle doesn't stick, I think, is because we're only exposed to the conflict between natives and colonizers, without any understanding of what life was like before their arrival. It's true that audiences were only given one narrow window into Na'vi history. What if there was a work of art that dared to ask the question, what happened on the planet Pandora thousands of years before the humans showed up? Well, Natakamea, and thank you for joining me for this discussion of the stage production that aimed to do just that. Today's subject is the unusual case of Toruk the First Flight, the Cirque Du Soleil show set in the world of James Cameron's Avatar. A thing that exists. Although the idea may seem utterly ludicrous in theory, upon further consideration, the combination isn't an entirely unfitting one. Part of Cirque du Soleil's appeal is the creation of fantastic worlds that are more about aesthetic than plot, and the acrobatic movement of the Na'vi would certainly align closely to the skill set of Cirque's performers. So the question today is, what exactly was Toruk the First Flight? How does it fit into the two worlds it inhabits, both as a part of the Avatar franchise and as a chapter in Cirque's production history? And, in the end, what was the long-term impact of this wholly unexpected collaboration? Because, in the words of Mark Bernardin, critic for the LA Times in his review of Toruk, Avatar is a blank slate that conjures little more than the sense echo of spectacle, which makes it a perfect thing to adapt for something like Cirque du Soleil. Or so one might think. So, to be honest, when I found out the show existed, my initial assumption is that it was James Cameron's fault. Another cog in his vertically integrated attempt to make a franchise out of one movie. Alongside Disney's Pandora: The World of Avatar in Animal Kingdom, or Massive Entertainment's Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora, which is definitely finally coming out this year, we promise. But as it turns out, James Cameron wasn't the one who first pitched the idea for Toruk. In fact, the first collaboration between Cirque and Cameron had nothing to do with Avatar.
I was inspired by the Cirque du Soleil shows with their celebration of human physicality and their made-up culture, made-up language, and it was very much in my mind when I was creating Avatar.
So in mid-2009, as production on Avatar was wrapping, James Cameron invited Danielle Lamar, president and CEO at the time of Cirque du Soleil, onto the cutting room floor at Lightstorm Entertainment, the production company founded by Cameron and producer John Landau. Also in attendance is James Pace, the co-founder of Cameron Pace Group, which owns the technology that made Avatar's 3D possible. There, Cameron makes his pitch to Lamar. He wants to film a Cirque du Soleil show in full 3D.
I had actually been trying to talk to the Cirque people for years, saying, why aren't we doing your shows in 3D? I met with Danielle when I was finishing Avatar, and I said, we could be doing this with your shows.
Avatar was released in December 2009, broke all the box office records. That part people know. 2 years later, in early 2012, Cirque du Soleil announces a theatrically released film, Worlds Away, to premiere at the end of the year. Cirque had released filmed versions of their stage shows before, as well as documentaries about the creation of those shows, but this was their first attempt at a narrative theatrical release. The movie has a loose plot about a young girl traveling through different worlds that happen to contain segments from 7 of Cirque's resident productions in Las Vegas. James Cameron serves as executive producer, and the 3D cinematography is done by Cameron Pace Group.
You sit in the audience, you see it from one perspective, but you go in with the 3D camera and you get in amongst the performers and you get up to those high angles where you really see the jeopardy of those aerial acts, how far above the ground they are, and you feel that sense of vertigo.
Worlds Away debuted in December 2012 to mixed reviews. I mean, it wasn't so much a movie, so much as a wide release fathom of it sort of thing, but it did fine in theaters. And that was, as far as anyone was aware, the end of the collaboration between James Cameron and Cirque du Soleil. So it took people by complete surprise in May 2014 when Danielle Lamar announced that Cirque du Soleil would be producing a stage show set in the world of James Cameron's Avatar. See, after Worlds Away came out, Danielle Lamar had a meeting with Cirque's artistic leadership, and the idea was raised to create a touring production based on Avatar, given the artistic partnership they now had with Cameron. In fact, the project was pitched to and approved by Cirque executives before they reached out to Cameron for the adaptation rights. Cameron, taken a little aback by the concept, nonetheless approved of the project, and it was formally greenlit.
I didn't envision it. Cirque came to me with this idea, and I thought that it was just fantastic. It was a match made in heaven, because Avatar is about a kind of a celebration of human movement, and it's about these alien guys called the Na'vi, right? But they're really us. They're like the better aspects of ourselves.
Although Cameron didn't personally pitch the Cirque show, I can comfortably intuit that the expansion of his IP was likely on his mind when he approved of the project. He'd already announced this mission statement as early as 2012. "I'm in the Avatar business. Period. That's it. I think within the Avatar landscape I can say everything I need to say that I think needs to be said in terms of the state of the world and what I think we need to be doing about it." But also of particular note is this line from the press release announcing the Cirque show. The show is expected to debut before the first of 3 upcoming Avatar sequels, for which Cameron is currently in pre-production. 20th Century Fox, which financed and distributed Avatar, will bring the new films to theaters around the world and is also a partner on the live show. At the time the Cirque show was announced, Avatar 2 was in pre-production and slated for release in December 2016. So the thinking goes, by the time Avatar 2 Electric Boogaloo comes out, this show will still be touring. Perhaps if they're lucky, it'll still be around for Avatar 3. Cirque continues to develop the show, now titled Toruk: The First Flight, even as Avatar 2 The Quickening is postponed to 2017. After a lengthy development process in Louisiana, selected because the set for Toruk was too large to fit into Cirque's rehearsal studio, the production finally held its formal world premiere on December 21st, 2015 at the Bell Center in Montreal. And less than 2 weeks later, Avatar 2 The Last Jedi was postponed again, this time to 2018. Over the next 3.5 years, Toruk embarked on an international tour, performing on 4 continents, before finally closing on June 30th, 2019. And by the time it closed, Avatar 2 Back in the Habit had been postponed to 2021. So Cameron's possible motives of cross-promoting Toruk with the Avatar sequels didn't quite pan out. But, of course, I'm glossing over the most important element here. What does a Cirque du Soleil show based on James Cameron's Avatar look like? Toruk was directed by Michel Lemieux and Victor Pilon, who had co-founded the tech company Lemieux Pilon 4D Art in 1990. In the intervening years, they'd collaborated on a variety of multimedia productions throughout Canada, all of which involved increasingly close synthesis between live performers and projection designs. The pair were also Cirque du Soleil alums, having directed the 2006 arena show Delirium, Cirque's first production to utilize projected video as a central design element. Danielle Lamar hand-selected Lemieux and Pilon to direct Toruk, which would utilize projection design that put everything they had done before to shame.
Of the many dangers we face, the most terrible comes from the sky.
Toruk would be the company's first show based on a film property, which presented unique collaborative challenges. Cirque had worked with outside artists before, but up to this point it had mostly been musicians. And one show with Chris Angel, but neither party likes to remember that one. The first of these, The Beatles' Love from 2006, was a very close collaboration with Apple Corps, who control licensing for the Beatles. Apple provided Cirque with the original masters of the Beatles' recording sessions, so a new mix could be built for the show's score. And almost every creative decision had to be signed off by the two living Beatles, and the families of the deceased ones. This set the tone for Cirque's future collaborations, Viva Elvis in 2009, and two Michael Jackson projects in 2011 and in 2013. By contrast, Lightstorm Entertainment assisted in developing the projection designs, and the language and movement experts who worked on Avatar were brought in to consult on Toruk. But Cameron and Landau served only as consultants. For the most part, the project was developed in-house, with Cirque's artists taking the lead.
He tells us, guys, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? So it's great to have James Cameron
He's our script doctor.
But the biggest boundary being broken was the decision that, as opposed to the traditional Cirque du Soleil structure of a fantasy setting that allows for a series of circus acts, Toruk would instead tell a linear narrative.
So we have a storyteller that will help us to go through the story and tell us what's happening. So this is maybe for the Cirque one of the first which really has a story base to start with.
The shaman is having a vision. Our most sacred place, the Tree of Souls, is in danger of being destroyed by a volcanic eruption.
Toruk is not an adaptation of Avatar, but a prequel. It shares its setting, the moon of Pandora, as well as its blue natives, the Na'vi. The narrative of Toruk, then, is predicated on this plot point from the film.
Our guys call it a greatly in Optrix.
It is Toruk, last shadow. My grandfather's grandfather was Toruk Makto, writer of Last Shadow.
You wrote this?
Toruk chose him. It has only happened 5 times since the time of the first songs. He brought the clans together in a time of great sorrow. All Na'vi people know the story.
The climax of the film hinges on Jake Sully becoming the 6th Toruk Makto. When he goes to each of the Na'vi clans riding the Toruk, the response is, "Oh shoot, this guy is the Toruk Makto. We better listen to what he's saying." That's how the clans of Pandora are united to fight against the RDA military in the ending battle. Toruk the First Flight follows the story of the first Toruk Makto, 3,000 years before the events of Avatar. The protagonists are 2 adolescent boys, Ralu and Entu. During the ceremony where the boys will be initiated as men, a Na'vi shaman has a vision that the Tree of Life, the holy site from the movie, will be destroyed by a volcanic eruption. Ralu finds Entu hiding at the Tree of Voices, the place in the movie where Jake and Neytiri have their hair-based sex scene, and listening to them learn that only the Toruk can help to save the Tree of Souls. No discussion of how, just that it will help.
But to approach the Toruk, you must first gather 5 sacred objects from 5 different clans.
1. The cow as white as milk. 2.
It's the search for each of these artifacts that provides the opportunity for 4 distinct circus acts. Aerial silks, balance beam, Chinese poles, and... kites? Kites. Lemieux and Pilon were given essentially carte blanche to develop the story of Toruk on their own. They freely admit that the decision to set the story thousands of years before the events of Avatar stemmed less from a desire to tell a prequel story than because there was no way to represent the size difference between humans and a Na'vi on stage.
We said, how can we have human, small human, and tall Na'vi in the same show? And Guy Laliberté told us, why don't you put your story thousands of years before the human came?
It also conveniently avoided the themes of colonialism from the film. Just saying. While Cameron and Landau had to approve the elements of Avatar's world building that made it into the show, Toruk does introduce new material to the canon. The show utilizes puppetry to represent 2 of the animals seen in the film, dire horses and viper wolves, while introducing 2 new animals, the ostripede and the turtipede. And then obviously there's the Toruk itself, a massive hanging puppet controlled by 6 actors on the ground.
The character comes at the end of the show. To me, it was like we worked with different puppets individually, and at the end, we take all the puppeteers, we bring them together, and they give life to the character that is the title of the show.
Using puppetry on this scale and in such a representative way was also a first for Cirque. Another first was their collaboration with German tech company SAP to develop a dedicated Toruk mobile app to enhance the experience for audiences.
D'habitude, on demande aux gens de fermer leur téléphone avant de commencer un spectacle. Dans ce cas-ci, on est à l'opposé. En fait, on essaie de mixer tout ça ensemble pour faire que le public soit à la fois concentré sur le spectacle et participe au spectacle.
That interaction during the performance essentially manifested as lighting effects that the audience would hold up during the show to create a light map in the house. See the stars they're staring at in this clip? Those are audience members, not hung lights. But the real star of the design were those projections. Utilizing 42 high-definition projectors, the images covered the entire stage to immerse the audience in the story. The projections utilized motion tracking, allowing the technicians to adjust the images in real time based on actor movement. The heavy reliance on projection design also meant that scenic changes could be done almost instantaneously, without needing to adjust the set itself. Along with the decision to tell a linear story came the necessity of leading roles, characters that appear in nearly every scene. However, this presented a unique problem. Typically, the only Cirque performers who show up in multiple scenes are the musicians and the clowns. The acrobats, the ones doing the difficult physical stunts, only appear once per show for their specialty act. But Toruk has 3 acrobatic roles that appear frequently, Ralu and Entu, as well as the warrior Tsial, who joins them partway through. To this end, Cirque double cast those roles, having the actors switch places between scenes to allow their partner a resting period.
We could go away and plan and work on all these things together and have great discussions and openly and comfortably say, that looks bad, don't do that.
We do it a lot.
The cast of Toruk included 36 performers and more than twice as many technicians running the show from backstage. Credit must be given at this point to PSM Franz Godin and APSM Véronique Lachance, who had the task of calling this beast of a show. All this to say that Toruk had a lot to balance. Lol, balance. The prior expectations associated with both Cirque du Soleil and the Avatar franchise, the massive technical undertaking of producing the show, and the unique story being told within the production. So, did the team behind Toruk manage to make something good despite these limitations? Well, here's another quote from the Bernardin LA Times review. At its best, Cirque is about the synthesis of form, strength, grace, and balance. It's about the tension that results when you pit will against physics. Trying to spot-wheel the narrative, especially one more complex than a kid who imagines a fantasy world, onto that only distances the audience from what it came for: acrobats, gymnasts, and strong men doing things the human body shouldn't be able to do. Another quote from critic Marwa Hamad, writing for Dubai's Gulf Times. The words Cirque du Soleil bring to mind heart-stopping stunts and gravity-defying acrobatic acts, but if you're heading down to Cirque's latest offering, you'll have to adjust your expectations. Overall, the show does not occupy itself with continuous acrobatic acts that will leave your heart lodged in your throat. Instead, it lends itself to on-stage transformations, where the expansive world of Avatar is re-explored in the flesh. And one additional quote, from myself writing for this video: "This is very boring. Despite all the effort put into building the world of Pandora on stage, the most persistent problem with Toruk is one of basic storytelling. The show doesn't trust its own stage language." Now, typically, Cirque du Soleil doesn't have to worry about communicating a full narrative, but they are quite adept at communicating emotional shifts, particularly in the voiceless interactions between their clowns. And typically, that's all the show needs, just a bit of stage business to bridge between the circus acts. Mediums like pantomime and ballet share a similar trust in audiences to comprehend the emotional arc of a scene, even if some details get lost. That said, one of the advantages of language is that it can communicate a lot of detailed information quickly and efficiently. Avatar, bland as the story may be, is quite good at this. Despite the alien setting, you can easily understand the motivations of each character, the obstacles in their way, and the actions each character makes in pursuit of their goals. The cause and effect, scene to scene, is really clear. Watching Toruk, then, you can feel the production sine-waving between these two modes of telling the story, verbal and non-verbal, and never fully committing to one or the other. This moment, after Ralu gets injured, is emotionally legible despite the lack of language.
Run, Toruk! Stanel! Ula izquierda. Niasru si vital tal si vom.
¿Qué?
Maentu fiep.
whereas this moment of plot development likely benefits from being relayed in text.
5 sacred objects for the Toruk, and a pure soul to ride it. The chief of the Kekunan recognizes the signs of a prophecy that has been passed down in his clan from generation to generation.
But while there are moments like these throughout the show, there are also beats where these modes run up against each other, and it can feel weirdly didactic.
Their new friend Sial is not allowed to go with them. The Taukami chief refused to give them the special seed.
We know! We just saw it! Not to mention the moments that really need a worded explanation but don't receive one, like the climax. What is the Toruk actually doing to the Tree of Souls in the end? It flies in, lands, and everything clears up. All we get is this sentence.
And thus ends the story of the Toruk who gave his life to save ours.
Freedom isn't free, support your local Leonopteryx. The most emblematic moment, for me, actually comes during the segment most praised in reviews. The Balance Beam Act, with the members of the Honorai clan balancing on the skeleton of a Palulakan. It's certainly an impressive act, but the moment that stood out to me was this one. Listen carefully. That applause in the background is the key. This is the middle of the Balance Beam Act, not the end of it. Obviously, people are going to clap at the end of each circus act, but if you attend any Cirque du Soleil production, you're going to hear people clapping in the middle of the acts, every time the performer pulls off a particularly impressive trick. The Balance Beam Act occurs almost exactly halfway through Toruk, and during the performance that was filmed, this is the only moment of mid-act applause that can be heard. No one claps for the aerial silk act until it concludes, and same for the Chinese poles. The kites and the other circus stunts performed during the narrative-driven scenes often don't provide a definitive final button for the audience to clap, and conclude without applause. Or they feel incongruous given the emotion of the scene. My god, I'm so upset, I could just backflip! Rather than the circus acts being the focus of the production, as they are in other Cirque shows, here the stunts only serve as punctuation for the narrative. The resulting dearth of active audience response would be damning for any other Cirque du Soleil show. But here we have to ask the question, is Toruk a Cirque du Soleil show? I mean, okay, yes, obviously it is, but is it the same kind of Cirque du Soleil show? In order to decide whether or not Toruk was successful, it may be helpful to determine what its goals were setting out. As mentioned earlier, it was not created as a shallow attempt to boost the IP of a franchise awaiting a new installment, although that likely was an afterthought. Even if the show hoped to still be running by the time Avatar 2 Dream Drop Distance came out, and it did hope that, James Cameron's distance from the project puts it in a separate category to the video game or the theme park. Was it an attempt by Lemieux and Pilon to experiment with linear narrative utilizing Cirque du Soleil's tools? Well, given how much the production second-guesses its own theatrical language, likely not. The reverse argument could be made that the world of Pandora was an intriguing, abstract setting for a Cirque du Soleil show, but if that's the case, too much focus is given to book scenes and world building, at the expense of the circus acts the show should center, the isolation of the balance beam applause being a huge indication of that. So what was the goal here? If neither the narrative, nor the circus acts, nor the expansion of the canon was given proper attention, what was getting all the focus? Think about the impetus for every decision that led to Toruk. James Cameron and Daniel Lamar met to discuss using a revolutionary new film technology. Both Avatar and Worlds Away were marketed on their groundbreaking 3D technology. Lemieux and Pilon were selected to direct Toruk, namely because of their familiarity with projection technology. The audience engagement work involved the creation of brand new phone app technology. Because Toruk does one thing the original Avatar never could. It made the world of Pandora real. Now, yes, Avatar uses photorealistic 3D models and graphics, and even looking back on it now, the effects hold up. Pandora looks genuinely impressive. But, on some level, you still know that it's fake. I'm saying fake as a neutral term, not as a knock against the film. For comparison, another film that's definitely fake is Who Framed Roger Rabbit. You know while watching that the Toons were not in the room when they filmed, but that doesn't take away from your enjoyment of the story, since the effects are so well integrated. Visualizing a world that we know could never exist in reality is one of the strengths of film as a medium, which is why it's such an achievement that Toruk was tasked with taking this world that had only ever existed in computer images and had to find a way to represent it in the real world. And for the most part, they succeeded. The plants grow in real time, the oceans swirl over the rocks, there's a genuinely impressive rock slide effect. And all of this on a base set that looks like one of the mocap rooms where the original Avatar was filmed.
Look at the tree. Wow, it's totally... No, the tree.
So perhaps Toruk, despite putting a significant effort into telling a cogent narrative, found the most success in the technological achievements it utilized, rather than with its forgettable story and characters. Which is to say, Cirque du Soleil did create a stage adaptation of Avatar. Just not how they planned to. Which brings us to today. Toruk has been retired since 2019, Avatar 2 Belle's Enchanted Christmas finally released in 2022, and I would put a significant wager forward that there will be no attempts to revive Toruk before the release of Avatar 3, 4, and 5 in the coming decade. Meaning that the production now exists only in recorded form. You can find it streaming on Broadway HD along with a documentary about how it was made. For most audiences, it's either a show they didn't know existed or a show they've now forgotten about. It has had, effectively, the same impact as the film it was based on. Or has it? See, there have been many articles written about audiences forgetting Avatar, but one group that didn't was filmmakers. Avatar did have an impact on how films were created in the 2010s, from the proliferation of computer-generated backgrounds to the push to release blockbusters in 3D and IMAX formats, to the critical attention given to so-called event movies as eligible for major film awards, rather than just prestige dramas. So, if Toruk really is a mirror image of Avatar, what impact did Toruk have on how Cirque develops its productions? Well, they continue to work with SAP on digital engagement, but since reports later indicated that only 1 in 4 audience members downloaded the Toruk app, they haven't developed another one. They've made continued use of motion tracking projections, particularly on Crystal, Cirque's first ice skating-based show. But aside from some projection mapping used for marketing purposes, nothing in subsequent Cirque du Soleil productions comes close to the scale and complexity of Toruk's projection-centric design. Continued experiments with narrative-driven productions have been made, but they have not utilized English language narration and not matched the success of the episodic structure of standard touring shows. They've also created another show based on a film property, collaborating with the Walt Disney Company, who incidentally acquired the rights to Avatar about 3 months before Toruk closed, to create Drawn to Life, a show with a loose narrative about a girl whose father is a Disney animator, which opened at Disney Springs in 2021. This all leaves Toruk in the position of being a milestone, but one the company has moved past. Many of the technical achievements from its production have been either improved on in subsequent shows, or done away with entirely. At only 5 years, its touring run is among the shortest in Cirque's production history, and it's a mere footnote in the ongoing development of the Avatar franchise. That said, if Avatar can be praised for its technical achievement while simultaneously criticized for its story, we should be able to similarly praise the incomparable work of the designers and technicians on Toruk, while questioning whether that work succeeded in immersing the audience like they claimed it would. I can give outright praise to the extremely agile acting troupe for the show, performing some of the hardest tracks of any Cirque du Soleil production, while also admitting that the plot is both under and over-explained all at once. In the end, Toruk is less than the sum of its parts, but much like Avatar, we can and should appreciate the achievement of those parts without needing to sum them up. It is a unique theatrical experience that enjoyed a brief run before fading into the shadows, and maybe that's all it needs to be. In a cultural landscape where intellectual property is king and franchises are vertically integrated across every form of media, plays based on films based on books, TV shows based on films based on musicals, or musicals based on TV shows, based on films, based on comic books, there's an appeal to the comparatively artist-centered development of Toruk. This was a performing arts company asking to adapt the highest-grossing film of all time, and the owners of the property essentially shrugged and allowed it to happen. The result is kind of a mess, but it's the kind of mess that is rooted in artistic bets that didn't pay off, not from top-down micromanagement to keep the adaptation in line with its style guide. There may be no future for the show, but even so, we should still remember Toruk the First Flight for the strange achievements it did manage, within the very strange circumstances of its existence. Even if it didn't have the lasting impact that James Cameron and Cirque du Soleil might have hoped for, it was a wild ride that, personally, I won't soon forget.